Okay, recording started. We'll get, that should be okay. So we're gonna close that window, move things off to the side. Yeah. No developer ever complained from the lights being cut. That's perfect. I'm going to close the chat too, so we can see a little bit better. So I was watching online. If you want to speak up and say something, you can join in and ask questions and stuff as we go along. I am Mark Niebergall. I work for a company out of Denver called i3Logics. I work on a drug testing platform. I always joke I get people fired for work. We're due about 4 million drug tests a year at this point. When COVID hit, there's a big drop by about half, and then it's shot back up. And it's back up beyond where it was before. So that's a good sign. The general economy as well. I don't think my company's hiring right now. We have off and on. We've hired people recently, but I think we're really hiring a QA developer here soon. But big thank you first to Entrada, the venue and food. It's good to be back in person for meetups after a long hiatus. JetBrains, we do have our license. We'll raffle off at the end still. Good for a year of any of their products. And Platform SH, they provided the Zoom link, the professional account, so we can Zoom the meetings, not stop at 40 minutes. Start off with the chance or change. When it comes up to unit testing or testing in general, there's kind of initially a resistance, I find. People I've worked with, or even myself in the past, or management in the past, where people don't like change. You know, we don't need to test. That's what I've heard so many times. Don't see the benefit of it. We don't want to change. We don't want to. It's different, right? We don't want to touch that. I think it's more of a chance to improve yourself, a chance to improve your code, a chance to make a change in your skill set and in the company and the product. That's been my experience with unit testing and other testing as well. But kind of initial start there thought. How can you make a change? Take this chance to either start unit testing or expand or increase your testing skills. You don't want to leave it up to chance. I should have. So the objective tonight, walking out of here, I want you to be familiar with how to set up PHPUnit. You should be able to walk out of here, have the commands. We'll post a video online, have all the scripts you can run to get it started. Should be familiar with how to test existing code. You should be able to, if you're like maintaining a legacy application, you should be able to add unit tests to that code, as hairy and awful as it might be. Know how to write unit tests with new code as well. So being able to write tests, be able to publish code, do a pull request with fully passing tests. We're doing PHPUnit with Prophecy. That's what I've generally used. It's kind of settled on that one as my favorite. We'll also talk about how to convince team members and management how to actually, why use unit testing? Why do we even need to do this if it's going to slow us down or whatever the argument is? So we'll go into that and talk about some ways you can take that out of here and persuade others. That's a good idea. I'm going to see if I can move this banner out of the way. Oh, that one. There we go. I'm gonna move to the bottom. The way to hide it. Maybe in the more. Hide video panel. Oh. Hide floating. There we go. Press escape to show me. Okay. There. That's a little bit better. These are 4 different kind of segments or categories we'll be going into. Benefits of unit testing, kind of the why do it. We'll go into the setup, what exactly you need to do to get it up and running. We'll dive into unit testing, actually writing tests. And then after kind of getting all that built up, we'll go into some how to test existing code. At the end, we'll open it up kind of discussion, questions, whatever, for testing in general as well. So if you have questions you can ask along the way, you can also ask at the end if you'd like. Anything wrong with this function?
Static. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just
Yeah. Yeah, you won't be able to mock it. Does it work?
No, it's the wrong concatenation operator. So that's the string for A or string for B.
Yeah.
Not what you expect.
Yeah.
So you get if it was 7 and 6, but it was string B 7 and 6 instead of
Yeah. Adding, you get be a dot, but what would it?
Okay, yeah, I got it flipped.
Yeah, if you would have plus on 2 strings.
If you pass in as a
Turn the strings
into an int,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
And if there's no numbers in it, it would turn into a 1. And so you'd output a 0. So it would return 0 fairly often. I know if there's any numbers, it grabs those numbers and uses that as the number. Yeah. You're gonna get all sorts of weird stuff.
Obviously, it's very clear.
Yeah. What a wonderful candidate for unit tests. Your first test, it might pass. If you call it with 1 and 1, it might be okay, but start adding different things to it, it's gonna be a disaster. Might settle on something more like that. This is what it might. Oh yeah, if you pass in, you're doing array merge, kind of, yeah. Right, yeah, it's different, but it's that's true. Yeah, but if you test an object that had a 2 float, is that a magic method? Anyways, so here we have I can't remember, is that variadic? Is that what they call it? Splat, whatever it is. This is one that passes all my unit tests. I do have this code up on GitHub. If you just look for MB or Mark Niebergall, PHPUnit, it is published up there. This method, the public function add, it correctly accepts floats and integers and returns a float. It uses types to ensure that we're actually adding things that can be added. It uses BC add, which takes care of the 8.00000 repeating out 1 problem, right? Or it doesn't add correctly if you don't use the libraries. Oh yeah.
If you put string 6 plus string 7, it comes with it. But if you put like string 6 plus like string T, it throws a warning saying that it's a non-binary and then it returns a T that's 6.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. With the float in there, that smashes that problem. Also, you gotta have the base, the 10, or it doesn't do what you think it's gonna do. I found out as well. Good thing you don't add in PHP very often, right? I usually leave that to the database anyways. But this is, so if you're not using unit test, you may produce a code and push it up that looks like the first example. If you are using test, you will probably end up with something more like the second example. So significant change on something very simple. That to me is the benefit of unit testing. You're finding your bugs, you're cleaning up your code. It's going to do what you expect it to do, unless the user story is wrong, right? In which case, it's still doing what you expect it to do. But it increased confidence in your code. This is the classic diagram, right? Some of the key items on there: programming defects found via pair programming. My work, we've been doing pair programming with helping onboard developers, and it's been really helpful actually. It's kind of fun. I get to know the developers a little bit better, your peers, and we find problems, both whether I'm coding or they're coding. It's very helpful. I'm not sure I enjoy doing it all the time. Anyone on full-time pair programming? Steve, by yourself? No. Continuous integration is very helpful. We'll get into that a little bit later. But the design or program defect found via test-driven development, that's where the majority of these bugs are going to be found early on, rather than when we end up with hot fixes and critical problems in production, which takes the most amount of time, most amount of resources. If you find a bug and you fix it, that's caught at the developer level. But if it goes through the QA team, whoever's in charge of maybe testing the platform, might lose customers over a problem like that. So it's much better for company side to find it before it gets to there. It just kind of makes sure we're on the same page. Automated testing, way to test. So if you go back to think about regression testing, in my company, we do have a QA team, and before deployments, we have a regression testing functionally or manually by people. But as testing is ramped up, that testing becomes a lot smaller effort, right? We're trying to chomp away and get rid of that effort as a whole, so we can move to continuous deployment, continuous integration. We're on continuous integration, not continuous deployment. So that's one of the intents with automated testing. Being able to get onto CI, CD as an ideal situation. Other testing technologies, who's using something else? What are you using?
Codeception,
Yeah.
which is on top.
Uh-huh.
Conception will integrate something.
So codeception is largely for so you can do acceptance testing, integration testing. The acceptance testing, the browser testing, although use cycles.
We largely use Behat. Behat that's another different talk, different presentation. I can't remember if it's what you consider it behavioral testing. So it makes API calls, generally testing your APIs, making sure they're doing what you expect to do, making sure that if you make a request, it returns with something that's expected. That's a really helpful way to ensure that, if you write a unit test, it might make sure that if you're using, for example, middleware, and your middleware layer works with unit tests, but the hat with the behavioral test to make sure that the entire stack works as expected. PHP spec, anyone use PHP spec? I've used it a little bit. I've had some problems with it, but it's still good if the project has major, it's very opinionated, and it even advertise it as such. It is functional testing, similar to unit testing. I'd make the argument if you need one or the other, not both. But it's very helpful for TDD, test-driven development. Selenium, of course, browser automation, and the others. So another benefits of unit testing, we are producing code that doesn't have as many bugs or defects. Mentioned it's a better use of QA time. I always feel bad when QA finds a problem in my code. Like, dang it, I should have caught that. It takes time from them. It takes time from, I have to switch gears and go back to fix whatever it was. But if I can decrease that, I want to do that. So it might take a little bit more time to write the test up front, but in the long term, it saves me time. I can focus on the one story, finish it, move on. Something I mentioned earlier is I have a high confidence in the code I deliver because of the unit test. If someone says it doesn't work, I can say, oh, I can prove it with the test. Okay, this is the test. This shows that example works. I like to be right, of course. So, not that. Was that? Oh yeah, big time. Refactoring. We'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, that's a huge benefit. I love coming up on a user story or a request and like, go change this or upgrade that, and there's tests and you know how to fix it. You can, even if you didn't write it, you can figure out what's going on pretty easily. A huge benefit. Oh, there we are. Next slide. So tests, if you have tests covering the code being changed, you can figure out what's going on and make sure it's still producing the same result. With test-driven development, we aren't going to go into test-driven development on this presentation. I generally don't do full TDD. It's kind of a mix. Depends on what I'm doing. I still have tests with all my code. But generally, you change the tests, you watch the test fail, especially like refactoring. I'll go in there, change the test, watch it fail, making it for the pattern of what it was expected, and then go change the code and then watch the test all turn green again, pass, no more warnings, no more errors. and now I can push my code up and make the pull request for it. Any questions or anything you want to bring up for benefits of unit testing? I've heard of it. I haven't used it.
I think it's got.
Oh yeah. Cool. That's very helpful. Yeah, PHPUnit does have code coverage. It's very heavy, and so it slows the test down. So the main project I work on for work, we do run it occasionally. You can kind of see that to me helps know, okay, this is area code, this is old, we know it's bad, there's not a lot of tests, let's work on that, clean that up, or migrate things out, and usually what ends up being. Or hey, I thought there were tests here, but there's not, let's go fix that. So the coverage is very helpful, but when it goes into CI, it takes forever to build. It can take hours, depending on the project. But unit tests are quick and run. So it's a very helpful tool. PHPUnit installed by Composer. Hopefully any project you're working on has Composer, anything current, anything started in the last 10 years. To set up a PHPUnit to XML if needed, and run your unit tests. I typically run with PHPUnit. PHPSpec has Prophecy Unit. It used to be baked into PHPUnit, but it has been changed. Sebastian moved it out, and it is now a separate repo. And so you have to add it as a trait as of PHPUnit 10, I think. And PHPUnit 9, you get deprecation notices and stuff about it. But PHPUnit 10, it's gone. So, which is coming up. And then Faker. Faker used to be run by, I can't remember how to say his name, but he abandoned it out of, I don't know. Anyone know the backstory behind that one? I've read about it. He's kind of getting tired of people complaining about it and all the time to maintain it. I don't think it was Symphony. It was like Fanzio or yeah, that guy. Yeah. So he deprecator ended support for it, and it got picked up by a handful of other well-known developers or open source contributors. It's now the main one used is Faker PHP Faker. Yeah, which makes sense. I think that's probably a good move long term. That'd be frustrating. Super simple setup with Composer, PHPUnit, Prophecy Unit, and Faker PHP. Phase 3, get up and running, get your test started. Pretty quick, pretty easy. If you do it in that order, you usually don't have problems with dependencies. Simple PHPUnit XML file. Won't go into a lot of detail on it. Most of the time, the default settings are fine. You can turn the pretty colors on, make it verbose. Set up a bootstrap if needed. Typically, you just pull the vendor auto load. The bootstrap is about all you need usually. Define your test directory. Typically, it's found underneath test. It's pretty standard. Running PHPUnit. It's important to remember to make sure your PHP version matches up. So use a container or use a VM or whatever, and make sure those versions match. In this case, for tonight, I was using PHP 8. And just outputs a little, display. If you have any errors or problems, it'll tell you what exactly failed and where it's at. Go fix it up. I typically will run, if I need to run all my tests, I'll do it from terminal. If I'm just going to run one test while I'm developing, I'll typically just do it in PHP Storm. If you have a test file, it's going to have a little green arrow if you have it set up right. You just click on the side of the function, run your test, and it'll have short links and jump to the code. It's pretty handy. You also debug the code if it's failing. So that's typically how I run my unit testing. Typical directory structure. Your PHP files, modern projects will be in the source directory. In this case, maybe source math adder. All right. The test would be in test source and match up directory structure typically. And you always add test at the end of the file. That's pretty standard. So if you had source math adder, you'd have test source math adder test. Writing tests. If you come back to our little adder function, we'll go through the tests that are for this. So as mentioned, we have the protected adder. There is a setup that you can use if you have some stuff that's going to be done for every single test. It's pretty helpful to do that. Set up in there. This is a simple example where it's just going to be adding an adder. Yeah, I don't go over that, but yeah, there is a teardown if you need to do that. I always name mine, I think in order to get test automated picked up, it has to be prefaced with test, if I remember right, the function name. So in this case, test adder with setup. I like to make mine descriptive, just to make sure that, so it's easy to understand what's being tested. Someone goes through and tries to figure out your code is a pain. So if name it, yeah, it needs to be public. Very true. I've never run into that problem. So in this case, we can add 3 and 7 and assert that the output is 10. 10.0, it's a float. The assertions are key. You'll get a warning. It's a warning if you have a test function that doesn't have any assertions. This example here, so remember we have float on the input type. So if it's not a float, it will throw an exception. So can't add this, it's a string. And so you do expect exception. So it's going to be a type error in PHP. And so then you can run your test to make sure that it has typing on it. You can't pass trash into it. That won't work. Testing adder, or adder adds integers, right? So we want to make sure it can actually add some numbers. So let's throw a whole bunch more than 2, right? Because remember we're doing variadic. And so just throws a bunch of things in there and assert that it adds up to 40. Make sure it adds decimals. 1.5 plus 0.5 equals 2. This is kind of examples, very simple examples, but make sure your tests cover your bases. We'll get into data providers later. That'll be another way to do this. But it is important to consider edge cases. What might the wonderful users do? They may always try to throw a wrench in things. Oh, there's the data providers. Data providers are awesome. You can write one test and test it many times. So in this case, remember how we're writing different methods for each one. Now we can just define the data provider. It's kind of weird because it's in the doc blocks. I don't know why they did that, but it works. So,
You can actually, I zoned out for a second, so I'm not sure if you said this, but when you're declaring a test function, you can actually put at test in the doc block instead of starting the test. And that will make it work as a test.
Yeah.
You can also do expect exceptions. Doc block.
Okay, I haven't done that one before. Yeah.
But yeah, there's kind of it.
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
Be interesting to see how they might change that with HPA attributes.
Yeah. Yeah. Might be able to stop using doc blocks and start using that. Oh yeah, the immutability RFC passed yesterday. We also excited about that one. It's a good one. It's a really good one. There was some resistance to it. People didn't like the read-only terminology, but after a lot of discussion and debate and voting, it passed. So that'll be a nice addition to 8.1. Going back to data providers, I like to throw, this one doesn't have a lot of examples, but you can go and add all sorts of things to pass in there. It is important, it must return an array of arrays. So the first array is all the different things that we passed in. And then the inside arrays, that's the parameters we passed in that order. So in this case, the first one, 2 is going to be the expected sum, and the numbers after get splat into the numbers. You can do all sorts of fancy things in there, but that's the kind of weird thing about data providers, how it requires that array of arrays. Test coverage we kind of talked about. But some of the principles behind it, you're not going for 100% coverage. That's ridiculous. It's not needed. We, my main project at work, we went and removed the test for all of our models because we typed them. There was no need to have a test to test the language construct. It doesn't make sense to do that anymore. So before it was testing, we had to test to make sure that it was casting is int or whatever it's doing. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It's gone. You don't need to write tests for that. Some people like to see that number go clear up to 100%, but that's kind of pointless. There's becomes a point where it's not needed. Really, the intent with unit testing is to test that the functionality is correct, the logic's right, not that you are testing every single line of code. With what do they call it? PHP 8, the constructor promotion, which is what we saw up there. No, we'll see it later. With constructor promotion, you don't even have the getters and setters anymore, right? They're not needed. Code should be self-contained. So if you're testing a class, a certain function, it shouldn't be reaching out and doing things. It shouldn't be reaching out to a different service. It shouldn't be making a database connection. It should not be calling an API. That should all be mocked through. It should not be doing those actual calls outside of itself, which really also helps with code architecture development too. You don't want your unit test making database inserts and updates and deletes. You don't want to be consuming or sending text messages or sending emails from a unit test. That would be bad. So you should be able to unplug your computer from the network and still pass all the tests, that kind of stuff. There's different types of assertions. There's too many to go through. These are about 95% of the tests I write, use these. Assert null is another one that I often use, I guess, but instance of is really helpful to make sure that something is an instance of a certain class. It follows the contravariance, where it can be, you can specify the parent rather than the child type if it extends that one. So for example, response might be a JSON response, but that'll still pass. Assert equals and same. There, one is strict and one is not. I have a total mind blank right now. The same is the same. Yeah. Equals is equal. Same is triple equal. Yeah. Same is district. So I generally always use same. I use equals occasionally, but most of the time it's same. Assert true, assert false, assert null. There's a lot of others, but most of the time those are the ones I use at least. You also have expectations. So you have expect exception. Certain exceptions can be thrown within the code when you do something, like we saw in the type error. Exception codes. This is really helpful if you're using codes for your errors. And if you have a specific message you want to have out in this, you can assert that message exists, or that's what the message is. Prophecy. So now we're getting into the mock objects. This is where if we have a service pushed in, you're going to specify which call methods are going to be called on it. Make sure you reveal that object when it's being pushed in. So the key is like I mentioned, the new PHPUnit version is to use the prophecy trait, and then it all works the same. For example, this is a rectangle. this might, I'm trying to think the best way to walk through this. In this case, we have a rectangle that has a length and a width, right? So all rectangles have a length, all rectangles have a width. It needs to be able to have a service of adder. And so the adder is mocked and then revealed on the constructor. And then it has to be able to multiply. So it needs to have that injected. And so it has a multiplier service that's passed in. It's this prophesize that you can pass in a class, you can pass in as a string, I should say, is passed in, typically with the class. You can pass in the interface, you can pass in an abstract, you can pass in all sorts of stuff. It can prophesize it. You then have this unit test, you're going to expect the add method is going to be called with length and width. And it will return a certain number. We expect multiply to be called with these two numbers here should be called. We'll return that. So this one's going to be like getting the area of the rectangle. And then we reveal it. I'm missing a line apparently, which would be rectangle area. Anyways, any questions about this? This is kind of the hardest part of figuring out unit testing.
So in the add one, it says something with,
Yeah.
so that's not a that's
In this case, I should probably just go to the. Oops. Yeah, they're defined up here. There we go. It's like it won't let me out. This is super easy to see. So here it's this is the one it's coming from. This might be the different. That might be the one. Oh yeah, this one's testing the perimeter. So we have test rectangle perimeter. We have the length defined, the width defined. And make this a little taller. Yep, it's that one. Yeah, yeah. So with that on there, so you prophesize it, then we can run the test and see happy green passed. If we go to the rectangle, this is it has the length, width, the adder, and the multiplier. So the perimeter is doing a multiply, right? It is multiply the length and the width times 2. So it's going to multiply 2 by the length and width. So now we're kind of seeing these services come together and working together. But the rectangle test is not testing the adder. It's not testing the multiplier. It's testing the rectangle. It's just like saying, hey, you should be doing this. It doesn't need to know that the rectangle is not actually calling out to those services, those classes. It does come up yellow in PHP Storm. It's awesome. Here you are defining out what is going to be called with which parameters. If they don't match up, it will give you a trying to call a method on null because the mock doesn't expect that to happen, so it doesn't have it there, and so get an error. Then you know your test is wrong or the code is wrong. You have to make sure those line up.
So if you put a dot block in front of your line where you want it,
Oh,
right-
yeah,
Right there too, then you can specify the bar,
yeah.
bar, and then you can type it, and you can do whatever your lockup is. Like a little lockup. But then you can put
Yeah,
it in
or-
lock that's mocking, at full intelligence.
I have done that before in other areas of the code, but not PHPUnit. That's good. Yeah, it's good. I never tried it. Yet.
So it can do both, right?
Yeah, it's
So you put the lockup, so should be called.
is it? I can't. There we go. Yeah, like that. And then it's like, come on, PHP Storm, do your thing. Yeah, that's good.
So now it's one that you call it not there,
Yeah.
but that's what you should do.
Oh, you're talking about here. Or
Yeah, it's saying it could be either required or whatever the box size.
I've gone into it. Oh. Yeah, it's going to be off here. Off of object prophecy. Yeah.
Get it right.
That's cool. I don't usually take the time to do that, so that's helpful to know. Thanks.
I'd say
I know I I usually do too in my code.
it's one of those things like, it's code smell, there's a warning, but it's wrong. So like,
Yeah. And this was saying it,
yeah, that may not be.
but it's something like that though.
Something.
That's good. Oh, it did down here get the reveal words now.
Rectangle expecting multiplier.
Yeah. Good. Because the multiply returns a float. Yeah. We go into a little bit farther here, but you can also do arguments and different things. So type float. You can do argument any. If I have a test that's not working, it's being stubborn, I'll do argument any, and then figure out what it is, and then make sure that's correct and update it. No, we'll go into faker a little bit later, but it's argument any means that you can pass. It doesn't matter what's passed in. It'll work. It should work.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Yeah. Because otherwise, if you pass in anything else, it fails. It doesn't. It just gets like a use stink as a developer. Go fix it. Yeah. I like to be as specific as I can. If I know what it's going to be, I'll put it. But if it's something I don't care about, because it's like an unrelated service, or if it's an unrelated class and I don't really care, then I'll just do argument any. Or if I can, I'll do argument type, specify the type, or argument or instance of it is. Or sorry, yeah, it's argument type, and you can do a class like that or class. Right, is that right? Anyways, I try to be as specific as I can. Like I said, unless I really don't care what it is. If it doesn't apply, it doesn't help the test to know what it is. to me, that's okay to then skip it. Any other questions? That is the weird part about prophecy. Databases are so awesome when unit testing. Said a test should never reach out to the database. I know there's some difference of opinions there. Some people use test databases. I have heard that one. That there may be good reasons for that. For me, I'd rather use Faker, not have it, no external reaching out from test. PHPUnit did used to have a, I don't know if it was an extension or plugin, I can't remember what it was, or PHPUnit DB or something it's called. And so you could, yeah, I was just looking at memory database built in. But they dropped support for it. Said, please don't test like this anymore or something like that. Yeah. I typically, if I'm doing a test for something that's interacting with the database, it gets hard if you're doing, I typically do prepared statements and it builds it as an object. So it's passing an object rather than a SQL string for my queries. And so I don't want to go mock all that stuff up. I don't really care what the database query is doing. I just want to make sure the query happens, generally speaking. That to me is a little bit outside the realm of the intent of PHPUnit. So I want to make sure, at least though it's going to fetch a row, right? This is where an example of argument any, or you could do an instance of or type of the class, but should be called and will return an empty array, for example. This might be your way to test that if it's not found, it does something specific. Yeah, questions? Yes.
Something different that should be called.
Yeah,
It should be called. It's probably a similar method that says.
Within should be called, you can pass in a $sign this once method call once or it's like once. There's like a certain number of times too. You can tell.
Similar to like.
Yeah.
There might be some constants that you pass in methods that
Yeah. Once. Yeah. Yeah, so it's like $sign this once is what you pass in.
So if you look at
I can't remember I usually only do it once. I don't usually have to use the other stuff. No, that's not it. But anyways, yeah. Yes, you can. We can go read the docs. Yeah. Oh yeah, right there. Yeah. Should be call times. There we go. Oops. Should be called times 1. That should also pass. Yep.
That'll fail. It's called twice.
Correct. Yeah. And a big note on here: if it's failing, if you get the molding, it's because you haven't done your test right. It doesn't match up perfectly. Okay. Any other questions? Pointers on that one? All right. Here's another example. For example, we use RabbitMQ and use message bus. So in this case, you're passing an argument of a command, argument type command. So there's a class, and the second one's going to be an array on the dispatch. Should be called will return an envelope. The messaging works. So it's not going to actually go, and you don't want to go creating message queues items and sending these out. It should just, you can mock that up. Testing existing code. This is the best part of so much fun. You look at your code from 2 months ago and think it's crap. We'll talk about some of the problematic patterns that typically you find that you may not realize you're developing as you're testing. Long and complex functions are so hard to test. It is such a pain, especially if you're trying to hit everything. Well, he's nodding heads, yeah. That's the worst ever. We have an old class in the project I work on. It's like 10,000 lines of code. This is like 13-year-old code. And it's always like, yeah. I always like to usually I just try to move things out of there or move it into a new class. We're doing just one simple thing instead. So as you start writing unit tests, you start finding these and realize, oh, I got to change my ways. Make the shorter it is, the more simple it is, the better. The more you can break it apart. So it's just doing one thing. Code that's missing dependency injections. You can't test it. There's no way, it should be devoid of new thing inside of code, maybe unless it's a factory, right? Using factory pattern. It's really hard to test code that's instantiating its own things. It needs to be able to be passed in either through the constructor or a setter or passed through the method. I was trying to think. There's 3 ways, and those are the 3. Just use global variables. That's perfect, Steve. We should just store it on the session. Exit and die. Oh my goodness. Printar, var dump echo. The printar, var dump echo, that won't kill your test, but it starts getting a little weird. Use a view or something that's going to output that rather than inline printar, var dumps, whatever. Use xdebug instead of var dumping. Stuff like yeah, exactly. If you're var dumping or printar and prod, you got more other problems. Other outputs, inline, whatever it might be. If you even hear doc and prod in your code. Anyways, these are problematic. It cause it makes it really hard to test, and it becomes very obvious when you're writing tests for it. Like I said, database connections, especially if classes are making their own database connection. Resources are also very weird. That's another area where it gets a little tricky. I like to use fly system for like file stuff, which has, you can set up different configs to go connect to local storage or S3 storage on AWS or whatever it needs to do. And it can go grab things from things. So that way you're not in code, fopen or writing things out. You're using object-oriented code. It can go and do the file stuff, and then you can write tests for it. So there's tools. If you use libraries, there's ways around that. Code that's out of the class, right? So the bottom, the classic, go to the bottom of the code or outside the class, and there's, do this thing down here, instantiate it. You can't write a test for that. Break that, find a different way to do it. I use Symfony Console. That's a really helpful one to me. If you have to run some sort of commands or different tools you need to run, and that way it can kick off. The console can run the command, instantiate the class, and do its thing, right? Instead of having it in the bottom outside of the code. Functional code, right? If it's just a bunch of functions and doing things, that's going to be a problem. You want to be in classes. Any other bad patterns we'll run into? Helpful patterns. I find generally, this to me has been one of the biggest benefits of becoming a unit test believer, is it promotes good patterns. Like if you're writing unit tests for your code, it's going to be better than if you weren't. The way in order to get the test to work, you're going to have to be your dependency injection. You want to have simple classes. You want to follow different principles of good code. It makes it better code, easier to read, more stable. It's not brittle or fragile. It works. Classes and functions that just do one thing. That has been a struggle to push for that for me. And my team is on board now at this point. But in the past, I've had problems where people want to add things to classes. Oh, it should do this and that. No, it shouldn't do both. It should just do one thing. It's okay to have 1,000 classes that are small rather than 2 huge ones that do a million things. It's better to break it out. It also helps reinforce abstraction. If you're writing a test for the same thing over and over again, that's a code smell. You should abstract that out, have one test for that function. Interfaces to make it, return types or whatever is going to be going on. I was doubled up. Am I going the wrong way? I'm going the wrong way. There we go. Oh, that's a typo. It's supposed to be code that is solid. I actually had this in the bad patterns and I decided to move it to the good patterns. I apparently didn't read the title solid enough. Okay, code that is solid. Anyone heard of solid before? Familiar with it? You could you could talk about this one forever, but we won't do that. Should be open for an extension, open close. This cough substitution, I summarized it as user interfaces and abstracts. Yeah, dependency inversion. Anyways, KISS, right? Keep it simple. I know a guy, his name's Stu, and he said it's keep it simple, Stu, instead of stupid. But keep your code clean. Have them in again. All right. Any problems with this class based on what we've talked about? What's wrong with it? Yep. It's got news in there. What about this? Write a test for this? No chance, right? But if you're not writing unit tests, it might look fine. Maybe, I don't know. When I started developing, I would think, oh, this is great code. Before I knew anything. That's going to be awesome. Yeah. Sharing is caring. So, yeah, what a great idea, right? Yeah, there's all sorts of problems. In this case, rectangle. Well, this is a shape class. Why does it have to be a rectangle? Let's abstract that out. Let's get rid of these news. Let's not have the API key in the middle of this. Unit test, clean it up to be this. That's a lot smaller than that. They're getting rid of this, by the way. I mean internals, people, developers, so you don't have to do the empty braces. Create is just a database insert, returns it. SMS area might send a text message to the area of the shape. The logger is ripped out, right? The logger shouldn't have been in there. It should be in the sending. It shouldn't be inside this shape service. It doesn't care. So then here's a test for it. Here's using Faker. I like to put the Faker factory up in the setup because you're always going to use it. There is a concept though, this might be a debate, but I know you can do these kind of things in the setup, but I like to have each test be compartmentalized as well, so that each test can do its own thing. So it's going to do its own instantiation. It's going to have its own things. I'll usually put Faker up in the setup. That's just my style. It's okay to have a long test if it's doing what it needs to do. That's my opinion on that. Others might disagree, but in this case, it's just going to test that it can insert. So there's a shape. It gets a shape. It should be called. It return a 1, and then we call it and create it. Here's sending the area. It's going to be a random float. Phone number. It should be called returns. Anyways, this is the DB mock revealed, and this the messaging mock revealed. We don't have time to go live examples. I think that's okay. We kind of did during the middle of the presentation. We only have a few minutes to wrap before we wrap it up. But any thoughts, or what have been struggles with convincing others? Perhaps that's always been the biggest hurdle I have found. Yes. Yeah. If you can push code up and it doesn't run your unit test, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Other places.
Now, how do you convince people that that's the way we should go? Or you should. No,
I know you had a good example, but typically you look at how many bugs we're getting. You can show how many bugs are catchable at that early stage of the test. But they don't understand. So that the point of hacking bugs or whatever, the biggest thing that's helpful with convincing teams is the measurable. So you can take things like code coverage, you can take things like number of bugs comparatively to what it is code coverage, and they tend to correlate because things are more tested before releases.
Yeah.
Bugs that are impacted to go down.
Yeah.
Once you can get somebody to realize how much your feedback cycle can shorten
Yeah.
the test, that as soon as people see that and start to believe it, then they don't ever want to not make the test because it speeds up the development.
Yeah.
Especially if we're talking about management, and of course it depends on it's like I've worked for companies where our manager was basically, or our CEO was basically sales. Didn't know anything about software or technology, and it was hard to convince him of anything unless you gave him full hard numbers. Said, look, if we do this, then it's going to save us this money.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do with unit testing. It's hard to show him ROI because the ROI is something that happens in the future. It's a cost now, but it saves us in the future. That can be hard to show. I've also had a CEO that was a software developer.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I kind of learned with my current job, we basically don't even have it. So just the savings in unit cost in not having to hire a QA because our code is like testing.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting. It's been interesting coming to a company that's so most of the companies I've worked for don't they say they want unit testing, but
Yeah. Right.
but this company, like the whole company is totally for like you cannot you create a merge request and the code coverage percentage goes down, it rejects the merge request.
Yeah.
Which I have issue with that, but that's a different story. That's a different.
Yeah.
Takes me wrong.
Yeah. But so that's, that's, you just have to feel out, like, who's your audience? Is
Yeah.
your audience a technical person? Get them, they show them the technical, how it's gonna help, then that's how you address it. If it's a salesperson, that gets a lot harder,
Yeah.
and you gotta find a way to show.
It's good.
Find a way to show how we have this testing. Don't need this. Spend all this money by paying developers to fix all these bugs that wouldn't happen in the first place.
Yeah.
Fortunately, sometimes the reaction to that is when they just don't create bugs.
Yeah. Don't create bugs.
If our
Easy.
If our developers are so bad that they're creating all these bugs, it's not how it works.
Yeah.
One of the things that I use to sell too is the ability to change the way departments speak step concepts where
Yeah.
rather than having people file arbitrary bugs that are descriptors that developers that research into, it's by unit tests to test code abilities. To have to have tests to be able to put tests around them sort of concept, right?
Yeah.
So you can create an environment where reproducibility, putting sort of developer
Yes. That's a good one. That's a good.
I would say for developers, experience. So if you were to give someone a project, say, this has unit tests, go ahead and create it. Say,
Yeah.
then you give them a different project without unit tests and say, now I'll create this one. And you'll see the difference right away. This one, this one, this one. I got manually set.
Yeah.
But to be fair, you can't have a problem where unit tests give you a false sense of security. Where, oh, see, everything counts.
You can have those covered, but also
Overconfidence.
Therefore, it's good.
Everything's good.
Yeah.
you can also have code that says so many poorly written unit tests that it's hard to maintain.
Yeah. Yeah. The test has to be.
It's rare for a unit test than another test, but yeah.
Yeah, it's true. The quality of the unit test is important as well. Make sure you're actually testing the logic. Make sure it's actually validating the code.
Make sure it's not testing things arbitrary. There's plenty of ways to write tests that are actually complex than the thing you're testing. If you get that point, maybe move it back a little bit and realize it's protein.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was really good points actually. Everybody had some really good points to make on that one. It's taken time, but it's good to have that team standard. If we're going to commit code up, it's going to have tests on it. If you want to contribute to an open source project, it's going to have tests on it. Anything that's the last few years at least, the ones I've found have all they tout their unit tests and it's coverage amount and so it's an important thing if you want to be able to contribute, if you want to be able to have high confidence in your code. It's important. Does unit testing slow development down? This was kind of a let's argue about it. Slows the development down.
At first, it definitely does.
Yeah.
Long term,
I'd agree with that.
and like just talking about feedback cycles, my biggest thing about it is I don't have to like go over to my browser and log in and click a bunch of stupid stuff just to test my code.
Yeah.
I can just run a test and test my function.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so yeah, but does add some things, but also you're talking about development. Are you just talking about the developer's time, or are you talking about everybody's time? So you talk about everybody's time, for sure.
Oh,
it
yeah.
Speeds it up because it reduces
Yeah.
the overhead that you need for manual testing. Solid. You're automating the tests.
Yeah.
One dimension would be purely to write tests does take the time to
Yes,
time saving benefits outweigh that.
that is true. Yeah. Yeah. I'm under that agreement where it's, it might take you a few extra minutes,
No cost, it is more technical.
but you're not costing, the QA team or acceptance team, whatever, who else is out there, all this time. You don't have to spend time later fixing it as it comes back, and then you're spending extra time fixing bugs in it. You found other problems.
I
Hopefully.
find that when I do TDD, I actually find that I'm going almost as fast
Yeah.
as I am when I'm not doing TDD. Because the problem that you run into not doing TDD is that it is running down, is figuring out where your bug is. Because you text the bug and stuff like that, and I use text the bug all the time when I'm doing TDD. But if I write a test, run the test, write code, fix it, I'm doing a very small thing like that, right? And so as long as I keep iterating on that, keep doing that, it's very easy for me to see where my problem is. Whereas if I have to get it to a point that I can like go to the browser, run the test, and run my manual test on it, and so a lot of times it can be hard to kind of narrow down exactly where your problem is.
Yeah.
And so I actually find that I go, it might slow me down a little bit, but not much.
Yeah.
You also notice that it potentially helps, especially if we're junior engineers, to have the puzzle jump to the prior to trying to assemble the puzzle. So it possibly has less impact.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Possibly actually say it.
Yeah, it's very true. Lots of good arguments, like good thoughts. I'm gonna skip through these. We're out of time, but hopefully that helps. I think it was a good conversation, good discussion, entertaining. If you're not using unit tests, go for it. If you want to just branch out and try other types of testing, go for it. I don't think I've ever regretted writing a unit test for something. It's always been beneficial. I think the time is well worth it to invest in unit testing for your projects. Increase your skill set there, decrease your bugs. You're more of a benefit rather than a burden to your teammates. It's a good practice. There's my little blurb. The main thing changed on there, I didn't say I did during COVID, was we'll call it endurance sports rather than just running. I'm doing a lot of biking now too, and swimming and stuff. I'm often riding on the canal trail. Well, so the deal is I can't run right now because my knees like having problems. So when I can run again, yeah, I'm off on the canal trail just right here and all the way down to Orem and whatever else biking around too. So. And swimming, it's a good time of year for that. So, just a few references. Thanks. Yeah. We will, let's see.